All right. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency for Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. And we will not be having a meeting of the Development Corporation today. So this is our sole agenda in front of us. Before we go to privilege of the floor, I did want to do some introductions, or an introduction. And once again, thank John Guttridge for his service to the IDA. He has, as you all know, tendered his resignation, and the Tompkins County Legislature has appointed Jerry Dietz to fill the remainder of his term, and Jerry is with us today. And I'd like to say welcome. And perhaps the other members could just introduce themselves in case you don't know. Duxon?
Hi, I'm Duxon Grant. I'm on City Council.
And Deborah, you have an extraordinary pallor today. There, that's better. Okay. I'm sorry you're not feeling well.
Hi, Jerry. We're very happy to have you.
Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah. And Jeff?
Jeff Gorski from Sharp-Walker, Jerry.
Andy Corman, Tompkins County Legislator.
Hey, Jerry, Todd Brewer with the Building Trades. Nice to meet you.
Okay, and of course, Rich John. We know each other. I also have an announcement. One of our members is indisposed, Deborah Dawson, and under our policy, I want to read a statement. Board member Deborah Dawson will be attending the August 14th, 2024 meeting via video conference due to an extraordinary circumstance as outlined in Section 4E of the organization's public meeting video conference policy. This determination was made by IDA Chair Rich John. Deborah Dawson will be attending at a location that is not open to the public and thus will not count towards quorum, but will be able to vote on any motions on the floor. Okay, and then let's proceed to privilege of the floor. I have two sheets in front of me. We have Teresa Alt.
Is this on? Good. I'm Teresa Alt of Eddy Street in the city of Ithaca to talk about Southworks. You shouldn't give tax breaks to everything in the Southworks project. Take it into its parts. Refurbished buildings where locally existing profitable young companies move in to grow, they will be collecting rents very quickly and won't need a long abatement. In fact, probably won't need any abatement at all. Also, market rate housing should not be eligible for abatements as a general matter. The fraction of housing that is affordable should indeed get an abatement, but 20% of the project housing is not a big enough fraction, given that Dave Lubin promised affordable housing at Southworks as a substitute for the 37 units he did not allow at Asteri. 20% plus 37 should be affordable. And moreover, if Vecino had been allowed to build those units at Asteri, they would already be housing people, even after having to wait for the conference center. And we would not be talking about several years in the future after businesses. By the way, the Southworks project proposes quite a bit of office space, but Ithaca already has too much office space, and vacant offices are being converted into more useful apartments. So offices there should only be those directly linked to manufacturing on the site. If these to-be office spaces are in existing buildings, maybe they could be directly converted into housing. Think of the fashionable industrial loft apartments in New York City.
Thank you. And I have a sheet for Peter Wiseker.
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Wissaker. I live on Tioga Street here in Ithaca. Permit me to, well, before I start, and I hope this doesn't count as my 3 minutes, the length of the Southworks project led my wife and I to...
Can you get a little closer to the mic?
Sorry. I'll just do my stand-up bit. The length of the duration of the Southworks project led my wife and I to agree. I feel like I'm renewing my vows with the IDA for another 15 years going forward. Welcome. Good afternoon. Permit me to follow on some loose ends from the July 29th meeting and other discussions of the Southworks project. First, I want to second Teresa Alt's concern regarding the extra affordable units Mr. Lubin promised would be built on the site, replacing those that were lost when the Asteri project downsized. He's coming to the agency with a very big ask, and any deal you reach with him should include making him fulfill his promise. Second, please rethink the idea of giving the extended abatement to every building proposed for Southworks. Some, I would argue, should receive no abatement, market rate housing, for instance. Obviously, nonprofit spaces or spaces that truly involve risk might be considered for such abatements, but even in that case, the proposed abatements in many cases seem like they're likely too long. My guess is that any investor or lender would understand why no abatements would be provided for market rate housing, for instance, in a real estate market such as ours. Also, I worry about the length of the project. Is there a way to avoid cherry picking on the part of the developers? One could easily, with all due respect, one could easily imagine a developer or investor who starts their part of the development by building the market rate housing and a few buildings for which they find tenants, and then stops with a lot of the promised development left unbuilt. Could there be some kind of provision against that, to guard against that built into the agreement? Turning for a moment to the Camoin Associates impact analysis, it seems to me that we deserve something better, something that's able to incorporate the way the project takes place over time, and something that estimates the real costs to our communities of having a project like this here, what's sometimes called in the academic literature implementation costs. I recognize that a more detailed, sophisticated analysis would be an additional, probably unbudgeted item or expense, and that it might slow the process. Given the magnitude of the project in terms of cost and time, it seems worth the extra expense to get to both to get it right. Just throwing this out there. Is there anybody else who begins to wonder if this project could eventually turn into a kind of college town for Ithaca College, with the market rate housing being bought by parents and rented to students, and the retail facilities mostly catering to that demographic as well? I don't know that this would be a bad thing, but just something to keep in mind. Finally, I'll say what I always say when folks come to you looking for an abatement. And there are 4 points, so I'll finish quickly if I can. 1, once each element is completed, all jobs associated with it should pay a living wage. The agency should require that all workers who are attached to the project through the developers, the LLCs, or the services they hire to do work such as janitorial services, security, et cetera, should be guaranteed a living wage. Second, prevailing wage and apprenticeships should be attended to. The agency should require that the developers use contracts who pay the prevailing wage, as well as subcontractors who have an apprenticeship program. The developers should work with the contractors to meet these conditions. Third, the TCIDA and the taxing entities should profit from any sale of the project's elements. If the applicant resells any portion of the project, the state, city, county, and schools should be repaid for any taxes they've foregone, plus interest, or ideally a share equal to the percentage-wise to the amount of subsidy that's gone into that particular part of the project. Finally, please ensure that the contractor purchases supplies locally. Where the contractor or contractors for this project will be based remains unknown. Please build in language that forces the developers to try to secure materials for the project using suppliers within the county, as we do with labor. By materials, I mean both hard costs and soft costs. And this means local firms, not national firms like Home Depot, should be given a chance to speak with their suppliers and the opportunity to bid on supplying the job, or pieces of the job. It's likely necessary to see what kind of price matching scheme would make this possible without the cost of building ending up prohibitively high, but the effort should be made. Maybe this project actually will finally convince someone to open a construction materials distributor locally, and that would be a good project, I think, for the agency to pursue as well, to keep it local. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there anybody else who wishes to address the IDA? Seeing nobody, there's nobody online, I assume. I don't see anybody there either. Okay, let's keep going. We can proceed to business, and that is Southworks today. We have some guests with us. I'd invite them to come forward. And we have some guests online as well. Welcome to everybody.
Hello.
And I guess I would
like us to get started.
Yeah, well, before we go, I would like to thank Brad and Russ and Steve and any of the other council that worked on this memo we have in front of us. We just received it. We're not going to make any decision today, but I would like to invite some discussion of what's in the memo, and so we can start to understand it today. But before we get there, I'd give you a chance to just comment if there's anything you want to say at the beginning of our meeting.
Sure. Why don't we start with introductions? Just for the record, I'm Rob Lewis.
Melissa Suchodolski. And I'm Sarah Barden. I'm with Shift Capital, as is Rob. We're the two boots on the ground here in Ithaca.
And then online, I see Nina Lynch, Brad Schwartz, and David Lubin, who've all been hard at work on the project. And then I think Nina maybe wanted to tee us off here at the beginning.
Actually,
unless
I'm going to interrupt again, pardon me,
No.
But I wanted to thank you for the open house. That was a great event. I was impressed with how well attended it was and the amount of information you guys provided to people who were walking through. So, good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a fun event on our side. We really enjoyed it, and it was nice to see all who showed up, including you and your family.
Yes, and so I'll stop interrupting. Please.
Actually, you stole my remarks. I wanted to just offer a couple of updates on what we've been up to, and just also acknowledge the prior comments. I think the big takeaway for me and some of the comments we've heard both today and in other contexts are really how aligned we are, our team is with some of the community goals. And also just wanted to offer some updates. So the first of which is a couple weeks ago, we hosted 2 days actually of open houses. First day was really focused on leasing prospects, and then the second day was really open to anybody. And Sarah did a phenomenal job of organizing it all, making sure the invites got out, and we did have a really great turnout and really terrific feedback. And then the other is the other update that I wanted to offer is just how we're moving forward with conviction on affordable housing. Actually, and just yesterday hosted the commissioner of the State Department of the HCR, Housing and Community Renewal, that offers the affordable housing subsidy that's needed to execute affordable housing in the state. And just yesterday hosted the commissioner and the regional coordinator on that, and we are moving full force ahead on the affordable housing. And I hope that gives an indication to both the board and the rest of the community of our intentions and how we're moving. That's if everything goes well and our application is accepted and funded, that may be one of the first things to go. And then also love the idea on community or construction materials distribution, because that is actually one of the very things that we are working on. We've talked about it at length in prior meetings, so I don't want to get into details now, but just remind the board and the community that Melissa, who's in the room there today, is in the construction industry and has been a leader in a number of different regards, from workforce to also expanding businesses, and expanded her own business, and we're working with a consortium of construction firms to expand their businesses in the local area, including materials distribution. So thank you for those comments. And so just shifting to the memo that you received, just wanted to offer a couple of comments about how we approach this. Very much appreciated the comments we heard at the last meeting, and what the memo before you is really meant to be responsive to those comments and some of the concerns we heard. And then offer a clear process for how we can move forward. One of the key things that has been top of mind for us is balancing your concerns with the project needs, and also the ability to, in the out years, to be able to maintain momentum. I think one of the key themes we heard from the last meeting is a concern and a reticence to lock the future IDAs into a program, and we fully understand that and appreciate that. So I introduced this concept of check-ins, because one of the things that in those out years, let's say beyond 5 years from now, on the other hand, we don't want to be in a situation where we're caught up in a whole new political environment. So trying to create some sort of ground rules, if you will, for future review. So just wanted to offer that context, and before handing it off to Brad, who worked closely with Russ on the proposal before you. But thank you.
Okay. Brad, why don't you take a turn?
Terrific. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board and staff, and everyone else watching. So, Nana, thanks for your opening remarks. We recognize, folks, that you all may not have had a lot of time to review the memo in advance. So if you would like me to literally walk everyone through it, we can go sort of section by section and stop at each point for discussion, Mr. Chairman. I defer to you if you want to just...
I think that's a good suggestion. I think that's a good suggestion. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Section by section?
Yes, yeah. Okay.
So let's start with a 10-year site-wide based pilot with a 5-year extension. You may recall initially we were contemplating a 15-year site-wide based pilot based upon some comments and feedback we heard both from the board and staff. We're now suggesting or proposing a 10-year based pilot. That we got the sense that was going to be a greater comfort to your board with coming back in 10 years from now with the possibility for a 5-year extension. So what this provides is that we will submit an extension request 6 months prior to the expiration of that 10-year period for review and approval by the IDA, and you had asked us to establish certain benchmarks or milestones that would guide that decision-making process 10 years from now. And so what we did was we tied these benchmarks to the progress of the project. The 10-year point being approximately 2/3 through the total 15 years. So what we did was we took the market rate housing, the affordable units, and the commercial space, and we did 2/3 of what the total for the entire project would be. So for example, the market rate housing, 488 is the target or the milestone for the 10-year mark. Again, that's 2/3 of the total housing proposed, market rate housing proposed for the project. Similar, 122 affordable represents the 2/3 figure, and and 400,000 square feet of commercial represents 2/3. So there are some very clear quantitative metrics by which the IDA board 10 years from now can use to decide the 5-year extension.
And I will add that our hope is to very much exceed these goals, but we want to balance our hopes with some pragmatic guidelines.
Hey, Jeff.
And so I'll ask both attorneys, Brad and Russ. So the way I'm reading this is it's not necessarily locking the IDA or Southworks into these final numbers. If, for example, you fell short on one of the areas here, the IDA still could extend that an additional 5 years. Or the other way, if you've exceeded these, it doesn't necessarily require the IDA to accept the 5-year extension, correct?
Jeff, that's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly, and on the notion of if Southworks falls short, which again, it's not our expectation, as Nana said, if anything, is to exceed. Farther down below, on the bottom of page 2, onto the top of page 3, is some language that captures that concept, that if for whatever reason factors outside our control, market conditions, grants not coming through, if certain external factors cause these numbers to fall short, we come in as soon as we are aware that we may fall short, and we're required at that point to notify the IDA, submit something in writing, and possibly even attend to have that discussion in person. So if we sit on our hands and do nothing, we may not get an extension, but as long as we're proceeding with diligence and these are truly factors outside of our control, Jeff, then yes, we can still get the extension if we fall short. But that's the worst case. We don't anticipate, if anything, we anticipate the opposite.
You can request the extension if you fall short. There's no obligation or guarantee that a future IDA will give it to you.
What we've done, Deborah, all these milestones are intended to guide that future decision-making process. But look, I mean, we're setting these milestones in place because whether we fall just short or certainly exceed, these milestones and some of the other language will guide that reasonable decision-making process at both for the base pilot as well as for the individual 20-year pilots when they come in for their extension requests.
And I'd like to offer maybe just a couple of examples of where, circumstances outside our control. So in the case of affordable housing, for example, we are reliant on subsidy. As you can imagine, subsidy is a limited resource, and the state is trying to allocate it, throughout the state. And so there's no guarantee of getting the subsidy we need within this amount of time. We are going to be applying as we are currently, as I mentioned, and we are going to move forward with haste and diligence. But that is an example where our efforts, may not be sufficient. The other is, should there be another COVID and financing markets lock up? So there are any number of circumstances that could affect the actual execution beyond our efforts.
Hey, Deborah.
Thank you. So the market conditions in place at the 5 and 10-year marks are something that I think several of us were concerned about. And it's more or less implicit when you say the extension request shall be reviewed and considered for approval, and you're requiring a reasonableness assessment. But I guess personally, I would be a little more comfortable with some language, in addition to the fact that the request would be reviewed and considered, that an extension might be subject to modification of terms depending on what the market conditions show. Just a thought.
Thank you for that. I see Brad writing, and I'll say that for me, I'm not totally clear what the difference in that modification language would be. Brad might be able to parse that better. But this was our attempt to try to get something that was responsive to what we heard last time. Brad, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So Deborah, I think there's some language that Russ and I can work on to give you that greater comfort, sure, but I think the market condition language we intended to already capture in the language that we had drafted, and at the and on the individual pilots for each sub area, we have proposed a need study if the IDA so requests by an outside independent third party.
I appreciate that, and as I said, I agree it seems implicit. But when you say that an extension request shall be reviewed and considered, it could suggest that it's a binary choice. It's either a yes or a no. And, you know, having spent years dealing with legislative intent and how cloudy it gets over time, I just think it's helpful to be more explicit that part of that consideration would include a change in the terms of, you know, the first 5 years at 20%, whatever.
You know,
Yeah.
I do recall in the last meeting, and I very much appreciated this sentiment that it's entirely possible that we'll need, you know, additional, right?
Right.
That the pilot that we're contemplating is not sufficient. So I appreciate that concept because it can go either way. I think I'd just like to throw out, you know, one of the things we're trying to balance is this concept of momentum, because what we're talking about is in 5 years, right? And we are going to be, you know, in sort of full steam. And what I guess what we're trying to navigate is is not getting stuck in a whole nother negotiation that can take months and actually slow the project and become a project inhibitor and or something that actually slows the project down or prevents it from moving forward, depending on what the political context is at the time. So I don't know what the answer is, but I did want to, that is an important concept that we're trying to try and navigate in what we're proposing now, so that it's not completely an open new negotiation that, as you know, can take quite a bit of time and then become problematic for the actual project execution.
I think
Well,
that's
each of these extensions requires 6 months prior notification, so that would seem to me to be sufficient time if circumstances change that much.
okay. Ann?
Yes, I agree with what Deborah was saying as far as, because if you look at it, well, what if the IDA board does not approve it? Then actually, that's a delay too. So if I would want some type of language to say that not just approve an extension, but possibly, however the wording would be, with some modified, you know, some modification. And again, coming 6 months or earlier, you could, I would also put in here made at least 6 months, so that could give you more time, you know, if you come 8 months or however long, and if you're asking for something different, or if if things have changed dramatically, that gives us time to have conversations and look at this. So I would like to see that in there. I would also like to see with a public hearing, and then not have if required by law, because this is pretty significant. And if again we're building in that time to have the public hearing, it doesn't. I don't think it really delays that in any way. And then I also spoke with the housing commissioner yesterday when she was here, and because I'm on several things to do with housing in the county, so really looking at trying to get more affordable housing. And it looks like in the pipeline, we have many projects that are coming, and typically we're lucky if we, as you know all this, that we get one approved with the 9% LIHTC funding through, housing and community renewal. And so asking, is there ever a possibility where we could get two approved? And the answer was no. We're lucky to get one. And our region gets, a certain amount, and the county has been very fortunate because we've had really great projects, though, and because we are really working on this, but we're not guaranteed even one each year for the county. So it's not something you need to answer now, but this is something I'm going to be talking to different developers about. Is there any other way to get other funding? Because otherwise, projects are either going to be delayed or they're just not going to happen, the ones that are even in the pipeline now. And I think that's all the comments I had right now.
Okay, Todd. And then I'll take a turn.
Yeah, and look, so I got a few questions here. So I'm looking at this, when you're looking at the bottom of page 2 and top of 3 like that, so it looks like you carved out like all the risk for the developers, but I don't see any protections for the subcontractors that be in these jobs. Because you talk about the market change and another COVID. So in the contractor world, and I'm sure you know this, Melissa, when something happened, you sign that contract, you're subjected to liquidated damages, your business, your assets, and you still got to fulfill that contract. No one cares about the market and what happens with the pandemic. The contractors are still obligated to complete that job by the deadline. So they have to jump through hoops and borrow money that they weren't planning on and pay people overtime to get these jobs done. So there should be, if we're going to have something here to protect these developers, there should be someone to protect the subcontractors, some kind of language. I mean, they're the ones that are employing the local people. They should be the ones that have some kind of protection in there. And then looking at this, is the funding secured for this whole project or just for pieces of it right now?
Pieces.
What is for sure? What do you have for sure right now for funding?
So we are out getting funding for pre-development operations across the whole site. Those are in negotiation, and then we are looking at a potential 9% deal that we've talked about over on the Woods, which we would hopefully follow up with additional low-income housing development outside of the 9% program. But in terms of full construction loans for this stuff, we don't have any construction loans right now. This is going to take some time to bring all the pieces together and make happen.
I'll just offer a little bit more context. I mean, I think one way to think about it is it's a large site, as you know, and we're going to be parceling pieces. So an affordable housing piece, we've talked about Building 21, that is sort of outboard of the site a little bit. And as soon as we have what we think is a financeable piece to go to a construction lender, we will do that. Once we have the financing for that, we'll execute that piece and it'll go on like that. So there are going to be ultimately a number of different financings for the different segments.
Okay. Sarah.
Yeah, and so just to build on Nena's comments, and also something that was raised earlier in terms of like how much office space is planned for this site, what we have is sort of a map of which buildings might support certain needs and what makes sense in terms of flow on the site, but we're not building on spec, especially for the adaptive reuse piece. And so as I'm talking with prospective tenants, we're not going out to seek that financing until we know who wants to be in that specific building on the site, so that we can construct it to meet their needs. So we won't be building just blank office space on spec and hoping somebody will be filling it. We're really working to tailor it to specific prospects. And so that will inform the order in which buildings get constructed. It'll inform the stages at which we bring in that financing. Once we have a critical mass of letters of intent for a specific building, that's when we can get the ball rolling on each of those buildings. And we're getting pretty close on some of them. So that's kind of exciting.
And I would just add, there's also been significant investment by the developers themselves, right? So personal and private investment so far has taken us a very long way.
Okay, and I guess I'll jump in with a turn. On this section, I think this is heading in the right direction. I think this is a good stab at what we were trying to get at. I'm struck by that this is an agreement between the developer and the IDA, but it's really a three-party agreement in that it's us and you, and then an IDA that doesn't exist yet. And I'm perfectly comfortable with adding language here that tries to clarify what our present IDA intent is in supporting this project, specifically to say, we want to see the whole thing happen. And yeah, if it takes more than 10 years, if there's due diligence and it's proceeding, we want to tell this future IDA, we would like to see you approve this. We can't tie their hands, but I'm very comfortable with a clear statement of our intent. And to Ann's point, I wouldn't restrict yourselves to 6 months prior. If you get to year 7 and you're saying, we know we're going to go over, I would think it would be much better to have the conversation to say, it's coming, and maybe, you know, you look at it and you say, we need 12 years, you know, or we need 13 years. It's going to be somewhat organic, but I'm perfectly happy to have you guys coming in before 9.5 years to say, here's where we're at, here's where we want to go. But I think this is a really good direction we're going in.
Yeah, Rich, if I could just piggyback on all these remarks. I'm also struck by there is an annual report that'll be submitted. It's not like we're going to be doing this in a vacuum. We'll know on an annual basis what's happening. And I think that should help inform the IDA. If this IDA, future IDAs, I think that's an important part of this.
Yeah, Ann.
Yeah, just, I don't know if anybody said this yet, but where it's saying the extension request shall be reviewed and considered for approval by the IDA, provided the following requirements are met. So I don't know if we want to have some more flexibility there, because that is saying that all the housing, the different levels of housing and commercial office manufacturing, my reading of that needs to be met before we even consider an extension. So
well, but I think it reads in connection with what's at the bottom of page 2 and then on to page 3.
Plus, there's a lot of flexibility in, with things that are occupied, under construction, and building permitted. So there's a lot of latitude in there.
Yeah. And I think, Ann, so that was my first question there, and asking that it doesn't necessarily lock the IDA, nor does it tie the hands of Southworks in. And I think both Brad and Russ agreed with that language at this point.
Again, we're not voting today. So this is just, let's make sure everybody's on the same page, that we understand it.
okay, so I see this. Sorry, I didn't get much of a chance to review this.
No, that's
so
right.
You're talking about on the second page, number 3, notwithstanding anything, the failure to meet any more requirements should not, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, and it has a lot of lawyers' language in there about reasonable discretion, diligence, good faith.
Okay.
Which are all the language that we lawyers use when we're facing uncertainty.
Okay, great, thank you.
But it's the right language, yes.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I love your idea, because we try to, again, create quantifiable metrics, but your board speaking to the boards in the future and to give some guiding principles is something that we could certainly capture in some language. I think that's a great recommendation.
Okay. Is there more comment on this first section? Do we want to proceed?
Rich, if I may ask, just have Brad touch upon one thing that we talked about, and I don't want to belabor it, is that the base amount, the current assessed value of whatever it might be, or what it might be when the first transaction or first component of this closes, there will be an escalator worked into the pilot based upon increased tax rates, so it's not as though that's fixed for the term of whatever pilot may be coming into place.
That's correct, Russ.
Okay. Did everybody understand that? All right. Brad, maybe you could introduce the second section.
Okay. So, so each sub-area of the project, right, once it's either completed or has received a building permit and is under construction, then rolls off the base pilot, right, and is subject to then its own 20-year pilot. And again, some of the sentiment was, well, 20 years seems too long without having these check-ins. But what happened is, for the first 5 years of the project, each sub-area, right, gets its own 20-year pilot, as each sub-areas come online in the first 5 years. In year 5, we then have to come back to your board, future board, with an update, and to request that that same process continue. Again, that process is that for the first 5 years, as each sub-area comes online, is completed or is under construction, it automatically gets a 20-year pilot. It's administratively dealt with. A new schedule gets added to a pilot agreement, and each sub-area, again, is subject to 20 years. In 5 years, we come back in for a request to continue that same administrative process for another 5 years for each individual sub-area. And again, we created some metrics that should guide the future decision-making. And now, because we're at the year 5 mark and it's 1/3 through the project, each of these numbers for the market rate affordable and commercial represent 1/3 of the total, right, unlike the 2/3 at the 10-year mark. And we also included in this last bullet under the metrics, a reasonableness assessment performed by an independent third party if requested by the IDA. That goes to the question earlier about needs and market conditions. So that could be evaluated 5 years from now as well for each individual sub-area. And scrolling further down, because these are 5-year extensions, we come back at year 10 and repeat the same process. And that will cover again years 10 to 15.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Just wanted to mention again that I would just would prefer a public hearing, not just if required.
Sure. Sure.
To be communicated
No harm
to
in
the
having a
future
public hearing.
IDAs.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and we'll make that consistent throughout.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, and given the updates that we made to the uniform tax exemption policy, if you're contemplating an incentive that adds another $100,000 or more, you have to have a public hearing. So it's very unlikely that, when you're an IDA 5 years from now is contemplating adding another 5 years of 20-year pilots or even to the base, that number would be more than 100,000.
So,
right, but just
it's fine to say it. Okay.
It's going to be a public hearing.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff?
I think I'll just say that Section 2 seems to contemplate what we had talked about in the last meeting. I think, at least what I heard from the other IDA members, that we were comfortable with the 20 years. And so this compromise in terms of every 5-year look back, I'm very comfortable with.
Okay. I guess I'll jump in as well to say, yeah, I think this is capturing what we discussed. And while we typically approve on a project-by-project basis, I think this, given the need of the developer for consistency and certainty to execute the larger plan, I'm comfortable with the 5-year windows. So I think this is heading in the right direction. But I'd welcome comment from other IDA members. And I again recognize we just got it. So, but I think it's going where we requested. I would ask, how did you get to the 244, 61, and 200,000? Is that just the remaining third?
Correct.
That's 1/3 of the project. So this is the first 5-year update is 244, 61, and 200. So if we look at letter C, by the 10-year update, now those numbers reflect the 2/3 mark, 422, 122, and that should be 400. So the 5-year mark being 1/3, and the 10-year mark being 2/3.
Deborah?
I would just reiterate, I'm fine with the 5-year reviews, but I would feel far more comfortable with some added language in there that the extension request shall be reviewed, considered, and modified as necessary.
All right, we hear the comment. We'll consider it. There's some materiality language that typically governs changes in projects. So, Deborah, we hear you, and let us come back to you with something. But I can envision a materiality standard, perhaps.
Okay.
And what exactly would that look like?
Just if things, there has to be a major change to
Right.
revisit. It goes back to Nana's point. We're looking for expectation and predictability. So we're not going to modify just for the sake. There has to be a real major material change in the project.
No, it has to.
And I think that's what you're suggesting.
It has to reflect a substantial change in market conditions.
Or the scope of the project, Deborah, you know, if there's.
Well, yeah, that's as well.
Right.
And your board's requirement, your application already has certain triggers and certain changes in the scope of the project. So that's a lot of Deborah. Some of this is already captured. So I think Russ and I just need to look at it to see if it requires any additional language.
It just never hurts to make it explicit. Thank you.
I think that's a good point, Deborah. Yeah. Ann?
On our packet page 4, so it would be 4C. I'm not comfortable with that the request that a sale could be to a profit affordable housing agency. I would like that to stick within our current policy, which would be if it was to be sold to a not-for-profit. Let's see. Well, I'm trying to actually property maybe something sold to develop. Okay, maybe I don't have that right.
Yeah.
Because our policy says for-profit or nonprofit.
Right. And typically, the affordable housing projects are done, your standard affordable housing project are done by for-profit entities. They take advantage of, you know, federal tax credits and tax exempt bonds. So that's, you know, the industry standard typically is either not-for-profit or for-profit, which does not impact the affordability requirements.
I'll just clarify on the housing policy. The housing policy was amended and does require that if you're selling or subdividing, it would be to a not-for-profit organization. The applicant here is requesting that the IDA consider a deviation there, that a sale to a for-profit affordable housing developer would be amenable. The developer is working with Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services. They're also working with Beacon Communities, which has done hundreds of thousands of affordable housing units all over the country, I think. But, you know, given the market of affordable housing developers, you know, they are looking for opportunities. I know that they did give right of first refusal to Vecino, another for-profit affordable housing developer. And my understanding is that Vecino said no.
Yeah, we just couldn't get to the finish line there.
Yeah. So maybe that's my confusion. Is this then not with our latest revision, that our portion says for-profit or not-for-profit?
This is a deviation they're requesting from our stated policy right now.
So at the letter C, so then is that incorrect? That's not our latest policy where it says either for-profit or not-for-profit. Ours current policy says not-for-profit, right?
This is not outlining the policy. This is outlining
They're requesting a deviation
the
from our
deviation
policy.
that they're requesting. our policy says a not-for-profit organization.
And I guess I would just comment, I know Rich raised this in the last meeting there, and I would certainly support this language that I guess I don't really care if it's a non-for-profit or a for-profit organization, as long as we're getting the affordable housing built. I would support this language in there.
Okay. Yeah, and we may need to have more discussion on that point, but yes, that was what I said at the last meeting, that it seems so hard, to me, it seems so hard to build affordable housing that we just want to get it done. And if it's a for-profit model that allows it to happen, I'm okay with that. But again, we're allowed to disagree.
And I would just add that when you look at affordable housing, these projects are so incredibly hard to finance, and there is deep subsidy required. And with that subsidy, generally that low-income housing tax credit, whether it's a 4% or a 9%, HCR is looking at all the pro formas, and they have limits on the developer's fee and when the developer's fee can be paid out, whether it's a for-profit or an affordable a not-for-profit or a for-profit affordable housing agency. So HCR does do that due diligence, and when they look at the waterfall of all the payments after the net operating income, whether it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit developer, they're pretty slim in terms of profits.
And did you have more?
Not right now.
Okay. Other questions, comments from the IDA? I notice on page 3, there's reference to various IDA policies, and I wanted to go back to Todd. You had some questions about subcontractors and contractors. We will be using or we would, if approved, we'd be using the local labor utilization policy. Are your questions different than what's in that policy? I want to understand your concern.
Yeah, mine are different, yep. I'd like to see stuff added in. Even with the current policy, I'd like to stuff added in there to protect the subcontractors who are employing the local people. For like Prompt Payment Act, and have you ever been involved in any legal litigation for non-payment?
I have.
Stuff like that, yeah.
Yes.
But stuff like that I would like to have in there, we're doing these big abatements, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if there's any reaction from the developer on this. Any thoughts?
I mean, those, I appreciate the comments, that those feel to me like protections that are built into the subcontracts themselves. I'm not sure if it's a developer IDA, but it's something that we could certainly consider. But if there's I think the example before, if there's another COVID or pandemic, there's force majeure provisions in those subcontract agreements. So I hear the comment. I think I want to digest that some and figure out a way how best to address it and where that belongs.
Yeah, and Todd, our standard language requires that the property remain lien-free. So if there's a subcontractor that's not compensated or paid pursuant to their contract and files a lien, that's technically a default under the IDA documents. So unless they clear. I'm assuming that's your concern. I was a little confused.
Yeah, thanks, Russ.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like this project is a little bit different in that there's going to be job training and workforce elements built into it. But we certainly do want to, in the greater scheme of things, make sure that subcontractors are treated fairly. I'm struggling a little bit on how we do that from the IDA, but I share the concern that we'd want that to happen. But it seems more, as Brad and Russ have said, it's the contractual provisions between the contractor and subs. But maybe we can think further if there's something we would want to see, but I'm not entirely sure what it is right now.
See, Russ, I mean, being this tax money like this, we could add anything we want to And any pilot program we do, right? If the developers want to sign on to it, then they sign on to it, and if not, then look at other options, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, as far as, having the desire of the board relative to subcontractors and them getting paid accordingly, that can be worked into the document. But as I said, that, we already have provisions in our standard transactional documents that, would enforce any sort of default provisions in the event that there's a tax lien or lien, mechanics lien put against the property.
And I guess, Todd, I would just say, having been involved in construction litigation as an attorney in years past, I would be very hesitant to put the IDA in a position where it would be a party to that litigation. I don't think we have the bandwidth to do it. We certainly don't have the budget and or the expertise necessarily. I'm thinking that we want to make sure that the contracts between the contractors and the subs are standard in the industry. I would assume that they would use the standard, like AIA type documents.
Yeah, that's required.
Yeah.
I know someone brought up about using local vendors and local suppliers. So one of the big problems the local people have is you get these big out-of-state suppliers, they give you 90 days to pay something, or if it's a big enough project, they might even give you longer because they could sustain that money until they get paid. Where the local vendors, they can't, they're stuck with like 30 days, because it could really hurt their businesses. So that's, I don't know why we can't, I don't know why we can't make stronger language there to protect our suppliers and contractors. There's got to be something we could do there. That Prompt Payment Act is huge, I think, if we could do something with that.
Okay. Well, I think we need to think further on that point. Brad, is there more you'd like to present on the sections of this, or have you essentially gotten to the meat of it?
I think that covers it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Further questions, comments at this point from IDA members or the developer?
Rich, if I may just very quickly, and I appreciate that you guys, the board received this, basically yesterday afternoon, and we apologize, but we worked very hard around the clock on this, given the short time between the special meeting and today's meeting. I guess the question I put forth is, what do you want to do next? As far as, we're going to revise it based upon today's conversation, and the board can't really approve anything of substance unless and until we get to the public hearing process, which, as Ann duly noted, there'll be multiple public hearings, presumably, as the phases progress. So I guess we want some direction from the board besides the obvious thing of revising the memo based upon today's call.
I'm happy to weigh in, but I'd like to hear from board members first, if you want to. I guess I'd say yes, please proceed with revising the memo to reflect our discussion today. I think that from the IDA standpoint, we probably want to receive some more public comment, but I would hope that by our next meeting, we would be prepared to weigh in saying, yes, we agree with the terms in the memo, or we don't. And we should have that memo well in advance of the meeting, so we'll be able to really think about it and perhaps even take a straw vote on where we're at on the overall project. Jeff.
And Mr. Chair, if I oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
And I would just remind you all, you also need to hold a formal public hearing on this, right, before the board takes final action. So what we could do, we could revise the memo. Certainly would love to get a straw poll type informal feedback in September. And then this would be part of the application process that you've worked with and deemed complete and ready for public hearing.
Yeah, that would seem to be pushing us towards a vote on this application at our October meeting. And I'd like to just ask the developer, does that work within your time frame?
I think that we would be very happy to see a vote on this in the October meeting.
So just to confirm, so we would contemplate voting for a public hearing in September, then a final vote in October then?
Yes.
Okay, I'd be comfortable with that.
And that September scheduling of the public hearing would be based upon this updated memo that reflects today's discussion, as well as the updated information from Camoin.
Correct, yes. And thanks for that reminder, because I believe we are going to get some further revision from Camoin. Is that correct, Heather?
Yes, based on discussion at the last meeting, those revisions are in the works.
All right. Are the members of the IDA comfortable with this timeline?
Depends how soon we get the revision.
Yeah, well, obviously, we'd need the revisions well in advance of our September meeting.
Yeah, we'll get them to you by, if not later this week, early next week, for sure.
Thanks, Russ.
All right. Further discussion on this?
I got one more
Yeah,
question.
go
So
ahead, Todd.
what, that part in there that Ann brought up about selling a project and stuff like that with, for profit. So Russ, what happens with when the applicant says, like, I'm all about the labor. So an applicant has, they're going to use local labor, and then they sell the project, part of it gets carved out and sold. What happens to those boxes that were checked? There's a new person that buys that part of the project going to have to agree to that? Going to have to uphold that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what happens if the applicant decides they want to sell a portion or all of the project, they're required to come to the board. If it's more than a 50% change in ownership, or whether or not they want to sell the project, they have to come to the board for approval if the benefits are going to continue. If the purchaser doesn't want the benefits to continue, which I've never heard, then they would just be put back on the tax roll.
All right, thank you.
And the subsequent purchaser has to assume all the same obligations that we're agreeing to. So it runs with the land in that respect, but unlike a typical transaction where we could just go sell in the market, we have to come back to your agency, disclose who the purchaser is, and there'll be a whole mechanism worked out for that in the pilot documents.
That's exactly right. They would have to assume all the rights and obligations of the Southworks entity.
And we'd have to vote to continue.
The benefits without the obligation.
Or not.
Oh, I don't know. You were just asking.
Yeah.
Everybody clear on that?
Can I just clarify? So if a parcel is sold to an affordable housing developer that's going to develop housing, that parcel will not get the 20-year phased-in pilot. It won't be part of the pilot for Southworks per se.
But
They
it
would be
count.
eligible to, it would count towards the 20%. We could look at something like the Cuga Park project as an example. Cuga Medical owns the underlying land on what's now 3 parcels, but one parcel is market rate housing that has a standard 10-year pilot at the IDA, and then there's the Market View Apartments, which is the affordable housing counted towards the 20% for the market units, but then also received that an additional, a different incentive from the IDA for it being an affordable housing project. And they came in and had their own application for that. You may see one like that with Water's Edge. However, if a project has the 20-year pilot and it's part of the Southworks development and they wanted to sell that, that's when the IDA, like Russ and Brad said, would have the ability to say, yes, we'll continue it, or no, we won't continue it, depending on a whole host of discussion at the IDA. But that transfer could not happen without the IDA's approval. And just as a reminder, I know a significant portion of this parcel is under that record of decision with the DEC, so the ability to sell off pieces is sort of limited.
Yeah, and just
Clarification.
to amplify on that, my understanding is that while it's been cleaned up to residential standard, there's continuing reporting requirements that would make it very hard to do on a lot-by-lot sale basis.
That's correct. There's a 4,000-page site management plan that governs what happens over time as we develop the site and how we make sure that the reporting that's connected to any issues continues in the way it's supposed to.
4,000 pages.
Just a little thing.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Do we know where everybody's comfortable with how we're going forward? Okay. Sarah.
Just the last comment I would make is I just extend the invitation continuously for anyone who hasn't been up to the site. We'd be happy to give you a tour. And this is not just for folks on the IDA. This is a sort of community-wide invitation. We do tours for prospects all the time, but we also want our stakeholders to be able to see the site, and it really does feel different once you're on it. So if you haven't been up, happy to host you.
Yeah, and I would echo that. If you haven't done a walkthrough, it's really a great opportunity to go see it. So, okay, moving forward, chair's report. I do not have a chair's report today, other than I already mentioned the open house, which was just a nicely done event. Staff report.
This is really Development Corporation related, but I thought I'd just report that we did close on the forgivable loan for Block 14 for pre-development, and we structured it so that it would be dispersed in thirds with a reporting requirement and invoices submitted for each of the additional 1/3 to be distributed. So the contract was signed, and the first 30,000 was distributed to the LDC group that's going to look at potential reuses of that site. I think I might have noted, but I don't recall that the Hive property was sold to another developer, and this is apropos of our discussion a few minutes ago about if you have approvals and your project is sold, all bets are off at the IDA unless you come back and request that those approvals would continue. And we know it's been a couple of years since, that project didn't even get approvals. So what I have done is I've taken it off the project list. Should, the developer or the entity that bought the land or any other future developer wanted to do a project or even use the existing site plan that was approved there, it's my understanding that they would need to come back to the IDA. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. It's not going to show up on any of my lists anytime soon, I don't think. I have been in touch with the owner, who happened to be the former owner of the site, to talk a little bit about potential. Not really interested right now, but he knows that there is some interest in further housing development down there, and some ability to talk to the IDA should there be another project. I was at twice annually, the New York State Economic Development Council provides an IDA Academy, a one-day conference, sort of mini conference for practitioners, IDA board members. Usually some of the service providers are there to just get updated information on state legislation that might affect IDAs. They do an annual board training for new IDA members or existing IDA members at each one of these. It was in Binghamton a couple of weeks ago. I participated on a panel discussion and presentation about IDA case studies and projects where I talked about our efforts to support community development through our housing and workforce housing policies. There were other speakers that talked about community development and site assembly and managing business parks. So it was an interesting discussion, and I will tell you, you all missed out on the board training this year. We had the attorney attorney that helped to craft the original IDA authorizing legislation back in the 1970s, came and gave a presentation. And we learned all about bonding capacity back to like England times before people came to the United States. So it was really fascinating that that's how IDA sort of evolved. We picked up some good nuggets. Ina and I and Kelly were in attendance. And usually I send out, you know, if folks want to go, it's a pretty nominal fee and we get a discount if we have more than 2 people there. So when the next one comes up in the fall, I'll be sure and let folks know when and where that will be held. And I will give a brief update on the shared commercial kitchen. I understand they've signed a lease. There are some renovations going on to the building, and they're checking all the boxes on complying with the requirements that the IDA put on purchasing that kitchen equipment for that project. So that may be moving forward here in the next couple of months.
Can you remind us what location they're using?
They're going to be at the former Green Star Commercial Kitchen on the corner of Buffalo and Route 13.
700 West Buffalo.
Oh, so the old space.
Yes, the old space.
Oh, I thought they had changed location. Okay, so that was the
They
original
considered
one.
another location, but they went back.
They went back to that one. Okay.
Yeah, so things are moving forward from what I understand.
And I would just add that during the open house up at Southworks, they had an idea board where you could put Post-it notes. And I went and read them, and like there were 4 people who said shared commercial kitchen. So it's an interesting thing that there's some community interest in it stated there. But
So you have in your packet the second quarter financial report. I'm happy to take any questions. I will note that the audit fees have gone up. We do an audit as part of a business unit, part of the county's audit. So the county picks the auditor, and fees have gone up a little bit. Anyone have any questions on the budget?
How do they allocate that fee to us? Is it some type of formula?
I have no idea.
Okay.
And this is pretty standard with their audit costs, though. I mean, for an individual, I sit on a regional loan fund and the Southern Tier Regional Planning Board, and I've seen this with the same firm over the past couple of years, around $13,000.
I see some money's been spent on the wayfinding.
Yes, and we do have a contract in place, and as funds are spent, we reimburse for those services. So we're starting to see some of that.
Has any of that reached the street? Have we seen any
This
signage?
is redesign of the signage and identifying where the signs are going to go. So I've seen some of the redesigns. They look really clean and crisp and consistent throughout what they're planning to do, but no construction yet.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the directors and officers? That protects us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We like that insurance.
That's right. That's right.
Any other questions or comments on the financial statement? Okay. You have some local labor waivers?
Yes, so I did report at a July meeting that the Breeze had closed and was gearing up for construction, so we're starting to see some of the early construction labor waiver requirements. Just as a reminder, our construction labor policy does require reporting and 75% local labor throughout the at the end of the project. We define local as Tompkins and adjoining counties, and there is a process within the policy to receive administrative waivers for certain items that are outlined, such as the need for specialized skills that are not available locally, a lack of qualified local bidders or available workers locally. We do require bidding we require submission of a bid list so we can identify for all of the specialties where bids were solicited locally. We do require bids are solicited locally if those subcontractors are actually present within Tompkins and adjoining counties. So the 4 that came in for the Breeze were reviewed administratively. Of course, if there's extenuating circumstances or other extraordinary circumstances that are not specifically outlined in the administrative waiver policy, it would come to the IDA for a decision. These were all administrative waivers. I reviewed all of the documentation that was submitted and they were approved.
And I just remind IDA members that if you wanted to see the full file, they're available at the IAED office, and you can go see them. Ann?
Just, I'm wondering, so I appreciate this reporting out of this. This is helpful. So one question comes to mind when I'm reading these, like, so we see the contractor that was awarded, that's helpful. Not knowing these contractors, I'm assuming the one in Dundee might be in Dundee, but would it be too much trouble to add a location? So we're getting an idea of, are they out of state? Are they like just one county out of our catchment area?
Yeah, absolutely.
That would just give me an idea of where these contractors are and what's available, because I know some specialized things might not be close by at all. And it's too bad to see that, what was it, the one that the Binghamton company wasn't doing, some of the work that they used to do. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll add that to that column.
Todd?
Yeah, I would really, I don't know, I think the intention of this local labor policy is, I definitely want to see these bids. I shouldn't have to stop by the office to see who bid this stuff. We should see it beforehand, because I can guarantee you, just seeing this stuff here about concrete, you couldn't find any contractors to bid concrete work. Oh, structures, I just find this stuff so, I'm not saying nothing with you, Heather, I'm just saying what these developers are telling us. Because I know for a fact that some of these developers are terrible on paying their subs, and that's why these people aren't giving them prices. So I would really love to know who they sent this, and it's nothing privileged. It's not asking for their bid number, not asking for their, how they, their inner works on how they come up with a bid. It's just asking who did they ask for bids. That's it, and who they asked for the bids and who supplied bids. That's it, just some names on. I'm not asking for any numbers, nothing personal, nothing confidential. I want to see that.
So the policy does require that the bid list be submitted, and the policy outlines what information needs to be on it, and it is more than that. It is, the dollar amount, the length of the work, who they bid to, who responded, when they responded, how they submitted a bid. And so, when they say we bid it to 29 people, I go and I look at the bid list and I see the names of the 29 people that it was submitted to, and, I make sure that the information that they're providing is accurate.
But what I'm saying is I can give more detail on, because I know for a fact that a lot of these companies, when they owe their subs money, and they're spending thousands of dollars with lawyers in courts trying to get their money that they're owed. And that's why these people aren't applying. I mean, big GCs that aren't working with these people anymore because they're not getting paid, in the hole for millions of dollars. I mean, that's why they're claiming they can't find local people.
Well, I get it. The policy.
They're getting tax money, they got to do their end.
I'm following the policy that was contemplated over several years of discussion and put in place, and so I'm following the policy, and I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not sure, how the IDA's policy can get at that information. If they're saying they sent bids out and they didn't receive bids back, and that's accurate, it doesn't really get at, why someone's not submitting a bid.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, we did spend a lot of time on this policy, and we came up with this compromise that we would get these waiver reports, and that if any of the IDA members wanted more detail, it's there, you can go look at it. But we had some concern about how much individual information about private companies was made public at a IDA meeting. We can change that procedure, but that's where we arrived. Yeah,
and no offense to Heather, her team, I would love to see a change in that policy because if something was brought to my attention, I could head something off ahead of time where now it's just after the fact and the waiver's already been granted. And I could tell you, I could have like 5 or 6 people that said that they, would or wouldn't have bid that job and for what reasons. I think if we're giving IDA money out to people, we should know why people aren't bidding these projects. I mean, I would help out Heather so she knows too. If they're not getting paid, they're not going to bid these projects, and it's just, we're hurting the people that are employing the local people, and the developer they're not acting in good faith is getting away with hurting them.
Well, this is up for, this is on my list when we review a subcommittee would review the local labor policy, I think later this year. We can certainly look at making modifications.
Yeah, and I was going to say that the committee can certainly do that homework again. But to get to the question you're raising there about intent or why some companies or subcontractors are submitting bids or not, I'm not sure a committee can get at that. It's some homework and going and talking to lots and lots of subcontractors and saying, are you bidding or not bidding and why? And I'm wondering how we would go about that, because it's something different than a committee meeting.
Being the labor spot on this board, I have no problem with you putting that, putting that responsibility on me because I'll get it for you. That's probably part of my due diligence to get that for you.
Would it be a survey though? Are we? Yeah, I guess I'm struggling a little bit there. Deborah, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I'm having difficulty understanding. If I understand what you're saying, Todd, you're saying that subcontractors aren't bidding on jobs because the GCs aren't paying them on a timely basis. Is that correct?
Sometimes it's the GCs, but a lot of times it's the developer themselves aren't cutting the checks or the project. They're not. Like there's a very large GC on some projects below IC that was owed substantially amount of money. And so they're not bidding to certain developers in town anymore because they can't afford to be paying out all this money to collect money that they should have gotten already. So and we got local contractors here. There's a Pleasant Valley. I'm not just looking out for the union, I'm looking out for any contract that employs local people. They were stiffed for a long time by a developer because they weren't getting paid. So they're doing it to a lot of people.
I think if we determine why people aren't bidding, if we can do that.
Okay.
I mean, if it's because a developer is not making timely payments, we can certainly, as the IDA, decline to provide incentives to developers who aren't timely paying. But if it's because the GCs aren't paying the subs, short of blacklisting GCs or dictating that developers seeking incentives don't hire those GCs, I'm not sure what the IDA can do. And I don't know if it's within our authority to blacklist anybody, or I assume we can decline to give incentives if developers aren't paying contractors. Is that right, Rich?
I think so. I defer to Russ on that. But, your comment about blacklisting, I would be very concerned that we would be inviting us getting sued. Yeah. I'd rather not have that happen.
That's why I like that Prompt Payment Act. I like that Prompt Payment Act. That's one way to keep the bad actors from doing things right. Pay the subs that have done the work for them. Pay them.
One thing
don't put them out of business.
We can do is, Todd and others, to the extent there's a deal or transaction that has naughty contractor that historically has liens out there, or is not paying their subs, or is not fulfilling their contractual obligations, that's something they're supposed to be disclosing to the board as a matter of course.
I'll give examples. So it's going to be coming to Heather soon, probably again, will be that CS Energy with the Yellow Barn solar project. That company, one of my contractors has liens on every one of their projects right now that they're coming out with, because they owe them like between $4 and $5 million. Another contractor took over 2 years to get his last $300,000 to him, and he actually ended up taking less just to be done with it, because he spent all this money trying to collect money. So it's substantial money we're talking, and especially like with this Yellow Barn project. And if no one knows about this, they're just going to tell you that they couldn't find any local bidders.
Okay, Ann.
Well, and as Rich noted, it's a tough balancing act between what is the role of the IDA, how can they interject? I don't know the answer to that. It's certainly something we can think about and talk about going forward.
Russ, how would the Prompt Payment Act hurt anybody?
I don't know the answer to that, Todd, off the top of my head. I can certainly look at it. I'm not a labor attorney by practice, but we have a whole group that I can certainly walk down the hall and get information on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not, it's just really making sure the subs are paid within a timely period, 2 weeks or something afterwards.
In the interest of keeping us going, Russ, maybe you could report on the Prompt Payment Act at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that.
All right. Ann, did you have something?
Yeah, so if there is a lien, two things. So first off, is if there's a subcontractor or contractor that files a lien against a project, so we would get, that has an IDA incentive, so we would get notified? Is that just automatic?
If there's a pilot in place, the IDA is in the chain of title and they will be notified.
So we would be automatically notified, sounds like, okay. And then, Russ is saying yes. And then, I think it was you, Russ, that said that if is it the developer or the contractor? You said that as part of their information when they apply to us, that we'll get, that part of that information is, do they have current liens against them? So I want a clarification on that.
Well, there's if I recall correctly, and I don't have the application in front of me, nor the underlying documents that are closed upon after the application, but if I recall correctly, they make a representation that there's no material outstanding litigation or tax liens, but let me confirm that.
They do.
There's certainly implement that within our documents and the application.
Yeah, there's standard language in the application that they sign and notarize, that they certify that, they're current and they don't have any outstanding litigation. And, Todd, I would say if there's a project that's coming to the IDA and someone has that kind of information, that's useful information to share with the IDA as you deliberate whether you want to approve a project. And, that information can certainly be brought to bear during that process. I know we've had a couple of conversations about CS Energy and that project, and I have that in my notes. And I would also say that, in one instance, we did have a situation where one of the union representatives called me and had an issue with some things that were going on with the developer and the general contractor. It was an IDA project, and we went down and all met together and met with the general contractor, with the developer, and sort of cleared the air and found a solution and moved forward. So, the IDA does have some ability to impact, this kind of thing, because the IDA has the ability to say, are you in compliance with our policies? And if you're not, then you have the ability to say, we want to terminate, we want to recapture incentives, if it's something that's really very egregious. So, some of that is built in to the certifications and the rules already.
Thank you.
And just one last thing, something to possibly look at when we're looking at reviewing this local labor policy again, is part of inserting when the contractor asks for a waiver, possibly asking for current information on lawsuits and liens and things like that. And then if there are, that doesn't get maybe an automatic, or no, not an automatic, but an administrative approval, that maybe gets it bumped up to IDA approval. So that's just a suggestion for later.
Okay. All right. Heather, I'm just curious, have they broken ground at the Breeze?
I don't know, I haven't driven by lately. The road was closed.
Oh, okay. Okay, progress. Anything further on the local labor waiver? All right. Moving on, we have minutes of July 10th, 2024 and July 29th, 2024, and I would invite a motion to approve both sets of minutes. Duxon moves, Jeff seconds. Questions or comments on the minutes? All right. I'll call the roll. Duxon.
Yes.
Deborah.
Yes.
Jerry, your first vote.
I wasn't here at either of the.
It doesn't matter. It's up to you.
Yes.
Okay, Jeff.
Yes.
Ann.
Yes.
Todd.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay. We at our last meeting, we had an executive session. I am not sure we finished the discussion in executive session. If anybody wishes to move to go to executive session to discuss personnel matter, we could continue that discussion.
Sure, I'll move it.
Ann moves. Do we have a second? Todd seconds. Right. I'll call the roll. Duxon?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Jerry?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. All right, so we'll recess for a few minutes. I do not anticipate taking any action after coming out of executive session.